Hi, I'm Sarah Blankowski, and I wanted to share this session I titled History to Corrupt the Youth. Wink, wink. This is an ode to Socrates. A discussion of new history works to discuss and share, especially with middle and high schoolers. So there is kind of a mature content alert. We'll be talking about slavery, genocide, massacres, and this might not be the best thing to kind of share with smaller children if that's a concern. So I just wanted to introduce that. This is an offering to share with the Virginia Homeschoolers Conference, but I also will be posting it on my page. So today is April 16th, 2021. So I'm dating myself. So if you catch this later on in the future, I hope you can kind of share those ideas, but I'm also hoping that the overall message of this presentation is just to share some things that I would love to see incorporated and updated into older curriculums, especially for my homeschool community. Sometimes it often takes several years to publish updates and add new information. So I wanted to take this time to share some really neat, very helpful information with helping us understand not only the past, but also the present and hopefully inform the future. So these are some newer things that I found in a lot of history books that I wanted to share teacher to teacher. So I hope you enjoy this. All right, so just a little bit about myself. I'm a trained historian, I'm a yoga teacher, and I'm a yoga therapy student therapist. So I love learning, and I also teach and homeschool my three kids. My eldest child has Down syndrome and autism and special needs. So I serve families and clients and teach lots of different offerings, but I'm also an integrative education coach. So I help people problem solve. And a big problem I find, especially in history curriculum, is a lot of it is outdated with older ideas or lacks a lot of things that help connect to the present. So this is kind of just an offering and some ideas that maybe if we incorporate these and teach our kids, this will help them understand where we were, especially in the United States, and where we are now, and the problems that still need to be fixed, and how that shapes our present. So, history to corrupt the youth. Socrates wanted to teach the youth to question the status quo. And this was one of the main crimes of Socrates that led to his death, him being ordered to drink poison. So this is an ode to Socrates to encourage the youth to ask questions, really good questions, to be inquiring, to question authority and question the wisdom of authority or the lack of wisdom of authority, and to help put pressure to create systems of equity, justice, and to keep making society better. So that's kind of the spirit of especially social justice and history, is to study the past, learn from its lessons to make our present and our future better. So I am not a neutral historian. I am critical and I want to shape a better future. So historians, we study and look at historiography. And historiography is the study of what people wrote about the past, history. So it's the writing of history, but it's also the critique of the writers of history. So historiography is always changing, it's always being updated. And depending on what type of study, what type of history you're studying, how far back you go, the farther away and the more sources, the longer the historiography. So especially we're seeing a lot of historiography In the present, year, I'm in 2021. If you're viewing this, a couple of years from now, but in 2021, we started seeing a lot of great sources come out of World War I to celebrate the 100 years of scholarship to commemorate World War I, but also to kind of understand just that whole world and what was going on. And it was very cognizant, especially a lot of the studies of the 1918 flu epidemic, which then all of a sudden now we're in the pandemic of 2020 and still in the pandemic of 2021. So there's many lessons that hopefully we're learning or relearning from that time. So a lot of the historiography would study not only the sources from the time period, the primary sources, but would also study the secondary sources written at the time and people writing about those secondary sources after that time. So a lot of what I wanted to chat, just to share and introduce some neat ideas, is kind of the current historiography of many past histories, but what historians are talking about today and how this information, maybe it can inspire you to learn more about that. And then if you are using older curriculum, you can kind of add new insights into your already existing curriculum, or maybe you can be motivated to use better, more cognizant, more updated sources. So those are all your choices, and I hope you feel supported in whatever you're doing. So just a wee little bit of just backstory. We want to keep working at history. Historians need to fill in the gaps and study agents from the masses. We study how did the masses shift change. We also want to study those who are marginalized from the greater masses of people. So we want to study all the perspectives. We want to see who was ignored. We want to bring those voices to light, to give them justice and to help understand their paths, their choices, and how that shaped their time and how it shapes our time. And then there's a lot of things, especially deceptions, that need to be remedied. There's a lot of voices that were marginalized, ignored, and we, in our current state, we need to go back and we need to find those people. We need to listen to their stories, study their lives, to help understand our present. Those are the things that we need to be doing. So some things to kind of, just some nice intentions to set when we are studying our social studies and our history, is to be open to different perspectives. Everybody has a different opinion. We want to be critical. We want to use critical discernment of perspectives. We want to weigh each carefully and differently. There is a need for different perspectives. And we want to understand, as understanding broadens and time passes, historical truth, established truth, is going to shift. And kind of look at history as being open-ended and open to interpretation. We get new information, new archaeological evidence, new scientific evidence, new evidence from other investigations. Other subject matter can really help inform historians. So we want to just keep revising, keep getting to a better and more accurate representation of truth, and just kind of be guided by that truth. So we also want to, when we are looking at sources and studying history and creating better history inquiries, we want to approach historical events with many voices, many genders, many races, many ages, many citizenships, class, religions. We want better picture. And then we also kind of want to recognize that deceptions need factual arguments with ethical perspectives. So this is something where things that aren't true, or things that have been completely misguided, so the truth is so skewered. We really need to fix that. That's what we should be doing. And it's okay to keep changing and keep getting better, and fixing broken narratives. We can keep doing that. Lots of great primary sources that historians use: journals, newspaper clippings, court records, personal papers, receipts of things purchased or bought, wills, who left property, money to who, and published narrative works and stories and journals of the time. These are the standard primary sources. Especially primary sources for like today's age would be social media accounts, archives, internet archives, blog posts, emails. These would be kind of the primary sources of today's land. So whatever current events that we're looking at, think about the historians writing about those, what type of primary sources they're using. So some of the ideas that I wanted to kind of share, I'm going to just stop this screen share for a moment and just switch to other links. Okay, here we go. So one of my favorite sources that I wanted to start with is the Zen Education Project. There are lots of great teaching materials that you could explore by time period, explore by theme, explore by resource type. The website is zenproject.org. It is free, and it has wonderful materials that you could add to your existing curriculums, or you could even kind of construct your own unit studies using the Zen Education Project materials, or be a really great place to introduce new ideas or places to kind of launch from. So that's really one of my favorite things. It's very inclusive, so it really makes sure to try to help bring a lot of marginalized folks into center more people from the margins out of the margins. We want to get everybody out of the margins. We want everybody to be included. We want to hear everybody's voices. We want to hear everybody's perspectives. Everybody's history is valuable. So this is a really great place that I love to start and get ideas. And just a really just general, wonderful, modern place to study modern history and to study the past with new insights, and with the spirit of inclusion and social justice. So one of the bigger themes going on right now in current historiography is the urge to have better representations in teaching Reconstruction. So Reconstruction is usually the term applied to the time of history after the American Civil War. And many historians have signed a letter, so made news here in April 2021, where they were saying that it's very important that school districts spend more time, if they have been teaching Reconstruction, spend more time to address so many of the issues, so much of the brokenness of the time that has really still shaped where we are in the present. So especially if we're trying to teach an understanding of the toxic white supremacy in United States currently in 2021, we need to understand the toxic white supremacy that was present in the time of slavery, before the end of the Civil War, and also the conditions after the emancipation and the abolishment of slavery. But we still need to study the toxic white supremacy and how that shows up in time periods, especially what we call Reconstruction. Though something to also kind of understand, this is where there's really wonderful books like an Indigenous Peoples, here you go, I have it right here. An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, wonderful book by Dr. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. But like many Indigenous scholars, and historians of Indigenous history. Sometimes it is very off-putting and very insulting to apply, say, the Civil War, Reconstruction, the American Revolution, these typical labels that we've used as benchmarks in the history of the United States to Indigenous peoples of the Native American continent, because that is kind of symptomatic of toxic white supremacy, kind of assuming that the United States had statehood, when to many Indigenous communities, the white settler colonialism of white Europeans coming to the continent was more of an invasion and a genocidal campaign coming into Indigenous nations, which Indigenous nation states that had sovereignty. So that's another thing to kind of ponder is what terms we're using in history and how we are approaching history from perspectives. Are we looking at it through the traditional lens of elite white supremacist history, which is very dominant, which is very capitalist? Or are we open to kind of approaching other perspectives, and especially perspectives from marginalized voices and many voices who are very underrepresented in historic narratives? So those are some things that are really being talked about right now in current themes and historiography. So I'm kind of just focusing a lot on United States history because that's kind of where my a lot of my strengths are. But of course, there's so many great themes and interpretations going on in world history right now. But I think most of this is more of some of the current neat things I'm seeing in US history by many phenomenal historians. So some works that I'm really loving that just came out in 2021, 400 Souls, A Community History of African America by Keisha N. Blaine and Ibram X. Kendi. So this is a wonderful book. Each of the chapters are just a few pages, so you can really kind of break it down. And it's a community history. So you have many different scholars writing on very important topics in African American history. So this is a really wonderful work that just came out with very much needed representative voices to really add to the historic record. And then another wonderful book that I really enjoyed, and this really helps answer a lot of the questions. Where did the history of racism come from? Where did so many racist ideas that still pervade here in 2021? Where did all of this toxic white supremacist ideology come from? Who really perpetuated these ideas? Who kept passing these ideas down? Where did this all come from? And the great scholar and historian Ibram X. Kendi compiled this really wonderful work called Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. So this is a really wonderful work. It's very well researched and very well written. And it really kind of tackles a lot of these ideas. So when you have, especially middle and high school students asking, like, where did all this white supremacy come from? Where did these racist ideas come from? Kendi did a really great work of trying to trace and say, okay, well, a lot of these ideas first start showing up in these resources and records around this time, and they're perpetuated by these, famous people. So this is a really great work to kind of just share and, learn about where these toxic ideas are coming from, where they're grounded in or not grounded, really. So then another resource that I wanted to share, and this is a really neat, just an example. So many historians, especially the historians of studying slavery in America, in the United States, This is written by Professor Cassandra L. Newby Alexander, called Virginia Waterways and the Underground Railroad. So it's very well researched. And what the scholar has discovered and really kind of illuminated is what many historians have known, but really they went and dove into the records to really trace and kind of show that a lot of people escaped. I don't know if I would want to use the word a lot. Some people escaped slavery from the South using by way of waterway. So it's been difficult to trace how people were able to run away and escape slavery. It's kind of a rare thing. It was very hard to escape slavery. So I think that's something that sometimes is perpetuated and very misguided, where it was very difficult to escape slavery. Slave patrols were very brutal. Slave patrols would go into the northern states to track down people who had run away. There was lots of heavy and very monetarily rewarding bounties on runaways. So it was very hard to escape. So a lot of the great research finding how people did escape, a lot of that research has been kind of hidden or very difficult for many different reasons. But now that historians are doing more dives into court records, ship manifests, and kind of really going through a lot of the records, they're able to find, trace, and piece a lot more of the picture of how the rare few who were able to run away and escape, a lot of the times they're able to get on ships, smuggle, and come into better states of freedom, or at least go along the road to better states of freedom. So that's something too, is just looking at the waterways. So that's a really neat development into the scholarship, and to help kind of give better pictures of how the few did escape. Some other things too to touch on, especially when we interpret and study slavery and teach about those enslaved, is also a really important thing, is looking at everyday resistance. So many people resisted slavery, or some people resisted slavery by trying to run away and escaping, and some did. And other people resisted slavery in everyday resistance. So just trying to survive was a resistance. Trying to just do, finding other ways to resist, whether it was being resistant by finding joy in really dire circumstances, that's a form of resistance. Whether it be finding little ways to undermine those who were being enslaved by, that's everyday resistance. So that's another interpretation too, is that looking at the total resistance, endurance, and survival, and not always just focusing on the rare few who were able to run away. Running away was very difficult. And while it was phenomenal to be able to run away, it was also phenomenal for those brave souls who endured and survived, and who resisted every day in many different forms. So that's another thing that I really wish and hope to see more in homeschool curriculums, especially that when we interpret and study slavery. That's on my wish list. Some other neat things, and this is kind of a little older work. This was published in 2001, but I would love to see more of it in history curriculum, is also kind of looking at history of corporations. And because especially trying to understand how corporations affect 2021, it's good to kind of know the history of some corporations, just to see how corporate entities, laws affecting corporations, how corporations have meddled and interacted with people in different wars. A really great work that is very illuminating, and integrates a lot of historic themes, a lot of historic tragedies, We also see a lot of like military technology, innovation, discussions of um, business and governments and privatization. A neat book is called IBM and the Holocaust. So this is actually very cognizant because it talks about how IBM machines sorted many of the cards to organize the mass genocides, the Shoah, the Holocaust of World War II. So that's something really hard and really deep and really hard to kind of wrap our brains around. But it's a really great historic work. The historian and the researcher Edwin Black, he also wrote a really wonderful book called War Against the Weak, which talks about the eugenics movement in the United States and how the eugenics, many eugenics researchers and promoters inspired European eugenicists, and that also helped shape and had very tragic consequences we see in World War II with the murder of people with disabilities and the murder with those deemed less than. So these are really important histories, but also perspectives that I think can really help middle and high school students understand not only why horrible things happened, but also how did millions of people, how were they murdered? I mean, and I think that's something too, is when you break down like what corporations helped assist that, which corporations used enslaved labor of concentration camp workers, so prisoners. And, you know, really helps us ask a lot of questions like, and raises really good things to discuss about corporate ethics and how the past, what's going on in corporate ethics today. Think about the topics of climate change. Think about the topics of workers' health. So these are all things that I would love to see more in our history curriculums. All right. And then, yeah, so finally, I'll just kind of land back on the Zen Education Project. So what I love about the Zen Education Project, they send out, you can get news reports to kind of see what's going on in teaching and historiography and interpretation. There's always really great lesson plans and teaching materials, and kind of give you an organization, give you information on kind of the why we work to teach more social justice and more bring more marginalized voices out into the mainstream, why that's so important, and why it's an ongoing process that's going to take lots and lots of work. So those are just some things that I wanted to share. And yeah, finally, here we go. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of go back to kind of a little thing is the reason that it's really important to keep changing and shifting our perspectives and trying to really kind of get better at interpreting the past is to make sense of the present. Right now here in the United States, we are suffering from toxic white supremacy. That's spilling over and that's hurting us all. So a part of healing toxic white supremacy, especially in history education, is kind of learning more about where white supremacy emerged, these toxic ideas, how this white supremacy has infiltrated so much of the way we live, so much of the way that we think, and how can we learn more so we're aware of it, And then how can we deprogram ourselves so we can stop and end this white supremacy and come to where we are building a more equitable, better, kinder, more inclusive world? So that's kind of the thing, is that it's very important that we keep fixing and studying everything that's broken so we can kind of try to fix it. So something that I feel is really broken that needs fixed is we need a better perspective of who we call like our founding fathers. Like putting them on pedestals and this heroicism, I don't think is really serving the United States at all. I feel that it's hurting our culture. I feel that it creates this trail and this realm of a non-reality where we lose touch with the truth. So, not to, inviscerate or eviscerate or attack or take down, someone's hero, but at the same time, I think I'd like to teach a history where we can kind of not need heroes. We can study humans. So something to kind of study humans is whatever you've been taught about George Washington. Something that you might not have been taught was that by many of the Iroquois Nation people, George Washington had the nickname of Town Slayer, because especially around before the time of the American Revolution, in a time where we called the French and Indian War, but because a lot of the toxic settler colonialism of white Europeans invading and taking over indigenous lands, George Washington was a part of that. And he got the nickname Town Slayer. Or you could even say he got the nickname Town Destroyer, depending on how you translate that. So that's not something that's taught very much. Something where we need to kind of discuss this. If we're going to study George Washington as a hero, we also need to study George Washington, like all aspects of him. We need to study George Washington as an enslaver, a person who kept people in bondage, and was a slave owner, and how he treated those that were enslaved. And he pursued people who ran away for years. So, I mean, I think that's just one example of a million of how we need to heal our present by maybe getting a better perspective of the past. So maybe we can make sense of how we came from X to Y, and now we're currently in Z. So those are just some things to kind of take away. So these are some books that I really love. Harriet Jacobs, she wrote a book called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, really wonderful autobiography, primary source, and a perspective from a voice that is often underrepresented. A really wonderful history book that I found very helpful was called I Am Murdered, George Wythe, Thomas Jefferson, and the Killing That Shocked a New Nation. So you have a lot of discussion of some famous Americans. Thomas Jefferson shows up, George Wythe, but you also have a murder case, some intrigue, and then some discussions of race and slavery and Virginia law. You also have the works A Slave No More, two men who escaped to freedom, including their own narratives of emancipation, especially the testimony and the narrative by John Washington. He was an enslaved man who crossed the river and escaped from Fredericksburg, Virginia, right when the Union were occupying right outside the town. He crossed the river into freedom. But freedom was, he also kind of joined and helped the Union Army. So I don't know if I would still use the word total freedom. It would be more of a better state, but that wasn't still freedom. You were helping the army. So let's just clarify that a little bit. I'm also really interested in a lot of the new narratives that are coming out and being more highlighted from resistant fighters. So you have a lot of neat memoirs and information coming out from Jewish resistant fighters from the Warsaw Ghetto. A neat book is called Memoirs of a Warsaw Ghetto Fighter. There's also some neat spy and espionage works talking about some of the agents who went missing in action, like A Life in Secrets, Vera Atkins, and the Missing Agents of World War II. Then there's some really great other works, some classic history books that I really enjoy. A Midwife's Tale, The Life of Martha Ballard, based on her diary, 1785 to 1812. This is a really wonderful biography and study of not only just Martha Ballard as a midwife, but her family, the people around the village area that she lived in, some of the things that happened in the town. A really great and very poignant picture of small town life during that time period. So a really valuable source. And then another interesting book is called The Cholera Years, the United States in 1832, 1849, and 1866. So these are some great books that you might just enjoy exploring. And then this little bit more about me. So I'm very happy that you joined me in my video, and I really wish you all the best in your journeys through history and social studies. Take care.